What to know about modern network security. What I want to go through today is 3 trends that I'm seeing right now in modern network security. To start with, let's go really broad. Networks have evolved. Attacks have evolved. The traditional network, which used to be your data center, network identity campus, is not the network that most security organizations have to protect today. Workloads have moved to the cloud. Users are now remote. The network that you own now is not the only network you have to protect. You also have to protect the network that you rent, the network that's in the cloud. On top of that, the identity that once used to be locked away in your network is now spread everywhere in the cloud again. And it's not like your campus, your data center are disappearing. Things are staying hybrid. That's not going away. Things like IoT, OT remain the same. Cameras, technology that remains on-prem, always going to be there. And this means that today, network security requires protecting a massive area of space right now. And this massive area of space, it's not like it's not attacked. Attackers are everywhere. Attackers are talking on-site, off-site, human, machine identities, network, cloud identities, managed on-device, services on-prem, the cloud. All these things are connected, and attackers are targeting all of them. The high-level trends that underpin this that we saw in 2024 were that attackers are multi-domain. That means they're spanning multiple dimensions. I'll talk about this in some detail in a few slides. Attackers are moving quick. The time to a breach in terms of moving laterally is less than an hour now. And on top of that, identity attacks are going to be harder and harder to contain and stop because identity ends up being everywhere. And the identity, it's not like it's a payload from a malware. It's an attacker with control doing exactly what that identity can do. So with this as a backdrop, I want to go through 3 key areas to give you an understanding of what modern networks look like and what modern network security means today. I'll go through some key numbers that I've been tracking, some attacker trends, and talk about Gen AI's impact on the current security landscape. Let's start with the numbers. So modern networks are growing. I kind of made that call out in that first slide. In 2024, modern on-premise networks, the data center networks, grew by 11%. Pretty sizable growth in terms of a market and a technology. 11% means more devices that everyone has to protect. But that was a small growth relative to cloud. IaaS, PaaS, SaaS all saw on average 20% growth in terms of spending. So that's 20% more workloads, more VMs in the cloud, more SaaS apps. All those things kept going up in the last year. And as on-prem assets, IaaS, PaaS, SaaS goes up, ultimately identity, because identity goes up, scaled with infrastructure. Every SaaS needs an identity. IaaS, PaaS, on-prem need identities to manage them, need machine accounts, need identities to access them. So everything ultimately goes up. The modern network is growing. And with that growth, so does the cost of a breach grow. We saw in 2023, 4.2 million average cost of a breach, 4.5 million in 2023, and in 2024, 4.9 million. A steep and steady growth in that cost of a breach. But what's super interesting, if you look at it and you double click in, that cost of a breach isn't, it's an average. So that breach can vary widely. And it also varies in the types of breaches that get seen ultimately. Private cloud, multi-domain, public cloud, on-premise, these are all the types of breaches they're seeing. But what I see is super notable is 40% of attacks involve not just on-prem, not just public cloud alone, but are spanning them, are multi-domain. And on top of that, those are the higher cost of a breach attacks that are out there. 5.3 is the average for a multi-domain attack. And they take the longest to contain, which makes sense. They're more complex. The attackers are in more places. So they're going to naturally be harder in this multi-domain modern network that's out there. Now, while that kind of points to some scary trends in terms of more things, cost of a breach, there are some positives that are underpinning the current world of kind of modern networks and network security. The annual ransomware payments actually went down in 2024 relative to 2023. Last time we saw a decrease in ransomware payments happened in 2022 when some geopolitical events started to happen. Now, this is really positive. Fewer ransomware payments means less damage to organizations. But this is a complicated world when it comes to cybersecurity and tracking attacker behaviors and activities. And so it's not without kind of its double questions and double checks here. Ransomware payments have gone down, but the number of data leaks supposedly have gone up. This is according to looking at the different data leaks associated with attacker websites, the number of leaks that are out there. That in itself could point to maybe successful breaches that are happening, but even there's some doubt. If you read kind of the literature that's going on in this space, those leaks may be fake leaks. They may be attackers trying to burnish their reputation and say that things are bigger and bigger. Ultimately, though, the underpinnings of this is a lot of government activity that was able to take down some big ransomware players like Lockbit ransomware last year, some things around kind of the scattered spider, but even those groups are back in action. So it's really hard to tell where this goes in terms of ransomware in the future. Other positive notes that are out there is that MITRE ATT&CK, which is the language that defenders can use to talk about what attackers do, the number of techniques that were added in the last year was only 3. That's a really small number compared to the year before, which was closer to 10. That shows a trend of attackers' behaviors kind of stabilizing here in the modern network attacks across these areas of cloud and network. And this is a good thing for attackers. The fewer new words we all have to learn to stop an attacker, the more we are prepared for stopping them. And on the point of defenders being prepared to stop them, there's a really powerful statement that's been made by the MITRE Defend framework. Defend framework, for those that are not aware, is the MITRE kind of defender, the MITRE SOC team framework for the tools and countermeasures, they call them, to counter MITRE attack. I'm a big fan of this. Vectra, kind of the kind of our AI algorithms have patents associated with them. They've been referenced in MITRE Defend. We're actually the most referenced vendor in MITRE Defend from a network security standpoint. But it's great. In this space, in the last year, there's 35 new techniques, and this framework went from a beta framework to a full GA framework. Super powerful, super cool to see when you have more defender controls growing than you have attacker techniques that are growing. The last kind of set of numbers is the numbers that I'm seeing out of Vectra ourselves in terms of what we're able to do in customer environments. What you're looking here is a funnel of activity. Vectra has a really unique and powerful way of using AI to take kind of activity, stitch it all together with AI, then take that activity, scrutinize behaviors, automatically triage them, and then score and rank any sort of activity we see based off of how threatening, how risky, how urgent it is you take a response. And this funnel here you can see is looking back over a long history of time. And ultimately, what you look at when you look at this global view of Vectra is that most customers in the modern networks that we're monitoring are seeing only 5 alerts a month. It's really few alerts, really high signal, really powerful for how attackers can be stopped and how defenders can be efficient with their time. So what do these numbers tell us all ultimately? Modern networks are shifting how attackers operate. Cyber attacks continue to accelerate even with landscape changes. There's a lot of changes that are always happening. And the defender position, though, ultimately, we can look at things like lack of increase of MITRE attack techniques, increase in MITRE defend, what AI is doing with tools from things like Vectra, the defender position continues to improve. Now, the next key area I want to talk to you about is what I'm seeing from attackers out in the landscape today. So when it comes to threat actors in the last year and going into now 2025, there's nation states, cyber criminals. The easiest way to kind of group these two activities together is in these different worlds. Now, if we look at it, when it comes to nation states, there's really 4 groups that are out there. There's Sandstorm, Sleet, Blizzard, Pandas, depending on your kind of vendor of choice in their naming convention here. Each of these groups have different objectives. Now, you may say, oh, I'm not really concerned with nation states. Nation states are only after geopolitical activities, things like that. But that's not true. There's been a different shift here where both the benefit and opportunity of any of these attackers to land in an organization and use it as a pivot point to get to another place, or in a direct place of kind of monetization, as these organizations are now being tasked by their nation states to monetize and gain money, they're actively taking place in things like ransomware and cryptocurrency theft. And so a lot of these nation state actors, their techniques ultimately are blending into the cyber criminal world, where you have ransomware, business email compromise, data theft overall, and identity brokers. while these are kind of two different, panels of groups, ultimately at the end of the day, the techniques are being shared across them. The behaviors aren't being segregated. If these are the nation state activities, these are cyber criminal activities, these groups are sharing behaviors across them. And so as defenders, it doesn't make sense to focus on one or the other. We have to be focusing on the broader behavioral landscape of what these attackers do. To give examples of kind of some of the things that are notable in the past year or so that have been happening in the attacker landscape, there was the Change Healthcare breach. This is a massive ransomware attack run by kind of a ransomware operation where ultimately 190 people were impacted and a $22 million ransomware payment was made. This was kind of notable because the ransomware group that was behind this, in this world of kind of no honor among thieves, ransomware groups work together. We're in kind of ransom ops, ransomware as a service. The actual provider of the ransomware took the entire payment, and the actual actor that was using the ransomware and ran the operation never got a dime. So no honor among thieves. Ultimately, a really bad and not the only, sadly, healthcare breach that happened in last year. The other one, which speaks to kind of some of the things I was saying about identity, was the snowflake identity compromise that happened. Essentially, info sealers were grabbing credentials where MFA wasn't in place. And those credentials then were used by attackers once they stole kind of their access, were used to log in, MFA wasn't in place, and they were able to steal millions of records from all these different organizations that had Snowflake deployed, showing that the modern network really isn't just devices, isn't just identities, it's everything here when you look at kind of these first two. And then you take it to the last side here, Salt Typhoon. This was a attack that I'm specifically pointing to here, driven by a nation state, where there were prolonged espionage happening in U.S. telecom agencies, where attackers had been lying in wait, stealing basically targeted information in terms of communications from these big telecoms, but ultimately having access to millions of users. This is a case where kind of government agencies have come out and definitively said, this is why you need network security, because the artifacts that were left behind in this type of attack were visible ultimately by a network kind of technology, network detection tool. It's useful to double click on terms of what these modern attacks look like. So I want to focus on one group, Storm 051. In the Microsoft nomenclature, Storm is a rising threat actor. So not yet named, but an attack group that has some TTPs that you can track going forward. They were seen exploiting public servers and sourcing credentials, kind of the standard thing. They are focused on getting in by any means necessary at this point. They then did discovery on kind of the endpoints they compromised, doing living off the land as they progressed. They used remote management tools for control, evading kind of detection because these tools were just, standard software tools, not necessarily malware. They used those then to do credential collection and discovery of the modern network, and then moved laterally, using actually payloads as they were able to here, and credentials to move laterally through the environment. From there, they got access to DC, and then they did defensive evasion. In this case, it was actually bypassing EDR, bypassing GPO policies, and then ultimately data theft and encryption of data in this environment. Pretty standard network attack profile here, and something that I've been seeing kind of, I'd say, for years now. But the notable thing, which I didn't call out in the timeline of this event, was that Entra ID and M365 and the cloud were also targeted as part of this. What the attacker did is when they compromised credentials on the network, they used those credentials to pivot into the cloud. They used a technique, again, kind of echoing back to a comment I made before about threat actor groups, be they nation state, be they cyber criminals, merging techniques. They use a technique called federated trust abuse. So when they do a federated trust abuse, they're able to basically get full access to a tenant through a backup tenant in the cloud. What's notable here is that technique was first really came on the market, first identified during SolarWinds, the breach basically by Midnight Blizzard, kind of a few years back. That was an APT technique that is now commoditized for ransomware groups. It's part of AD internals, an attack tool that's very popular and active, that is really effective in keeping these attacks hybrid and spanning the modern network here. Now, Vectra has seen in 2024 and in 2025 these types of attacks, of modern network attacks that are spanning these different domains, and providing the coverage across network, identity, Entra ID, M365, AWS, Azure, and a hint to where I'm going to go, even Copilot. We're able to stitch it all together to ultimately stop these threat actors. What you're looking at here is an example of a attack simulation where Vectra was able to provide full coverage for a multi-day exercise as the attacker moved through a modern network. What are the takeaways in kind of if you look back on attackers in 2024? Modern attacker techniques and motivations are merged. It's no longer just these are the advanced guys, these are the other kind of commodity guys. They're the same groups, really, ultimately, same objectives of doing bad things ultimately. Core techniques, they remain unchanged. That network kind of diagram I showed you of an attack progressing, it's really not that different. And even that cloud technique was from SolarWinds breach. It's pretty old at this point. But those techniques, much like I was talking about in the MITRE technique space, haven't changed. I'll give an asterisk to all this, by the way. I'm talking about techniques and behaviors. CVEs have gone up. CVEs continue to go up. And this is why behavioral detection ends up being so powerful still, because it can help stop these CVE attacks without having to know exactly what the CVE is, since there's just too many to patch, too many to stop. And on that note, modern defenses can ultimately stop these modern attackers. Behavioral detection, AI detection, stuff that I've seen built here and running in customer environments that Vectra protects, they can stop these modern threat actors. Now, last section here, you can't talk about the modern security landscape without talking about Gen AI, kind of the technology that's revolutionizing all of kind of our environments, all of our jobs, all of networks that are out there. Gen AI in the enterprise, if you look back to last year, $13.8 billion spending happened on Gen AI, significantly increasing even going into 2025 now. In terms of kind of specific tools, Vectra has been tracking closely the adoption of Copilot for M365. Vectra's M365 and Entra ID coverage kind of have been noticing an uptick here, and we've actually developed a suite of capabilities here because ultimately 40% of the customers that we're seeing with Microsoft deployments have taken and embraced Copilot for M365 at some level. Now, to kind of help explain other things in this space here, what is kind of the Gen AI activity as it relates to security? Well, Gen AI is not a protected technology. These LLMs, these kind of natural language technology, foundational models exist, commercial technology is available and accessible to me, you, and the attackers. And so as a result, LLMs are being used in attack development for scripting, payload development, intelligence gathering. They're being used to support actually the attack progression, be it doing communications automatically, translations, and ultimately we're seeing activity in all these phishing kits to help design really compelling phishing that lands attackers in there quickly. This is a problem in terms of its abuse. Microsoft actually had to do a cease and desist because some bad guys were using their Gen AI technology out there in ways that were not sanctioned, not within the terms of service of Microsoft, to help in payload development and other things. Those kind of payload development technologies, the Gen AI technologies to do that, were hosted in Azure ultimately. Now, I kind of hinted at one Gen AI technology that we're seeing a lot of uptake in, and that was kind of Copilot for Microsoft 365. What that is from a normal end user perspective is a means to increase user productivity. Natural language search for for emails, for SharePoint, for Teams, and a whole lot of suite to just write words down on paper, slides, things like that. But those searching capabilities that increase the productivity of individual users, those are also productivity increasers for attackers. Natural language search for email, SharePoint, OneNote, and Teams, all are things that make attackers more productive, faster, and more effective in their campaigns. There used to be tools like e-discovery and PowerShell that would allow attackers to kind of automate their attacks. Why bother with complicated scripts when you can write it in natural language? That's exactly how attackers view it. To give you an example of how kind of attackers are using Gen AI, I'll give you another kind of walkthrough of what we've been researching in terms of threat actor activity. Threat actor will generate kind of a Gen AI crafted phishing email that lands them in an environment using commodity software. It could be done even with ChatGPT. They then gain access to Entra ID. From there, they access Copilot for Microsoft 365. They then start to discover how to add persistence, because if they've stolen a token, let's say, in terms of their phishing compromise, that token then can be used to register, can't be used for that long. It'll age out eventually. So they need to register a device fast in order to give themselves persistence. And Copilot lets them find exactly what they need to do that. From there, they can register a device. They can then attempt to jailbreak Copilot by asking it kind of questions that skirt the edges. You can't technically ask Copilot, hey, find me all the password files. It'll know you're doing something suspect. But you can ask it theoreticals, like if you were to find all the password files, where would they be? But don't tell me them, just if you were, and kind of use really crafty language to trick it and what's called jailbreak it. And then use that information to find sensitive files in SharePoint that then allow the attacker to move laterally into AWS, Azure, or even pivoting back on-prem. Now, ultimately, this then leads to data theft to impact any of those objectives that the attackers ultimately have in this space. It's just a normal attack. It's just a normal attack that moves much faster. And we've seen this. We've developed the capabilities here, ability to audit these users, ability to correlate these kind of detections that we generate on Copilot usage. All these things ultimately let us protect organizations as they are embracing Gen AI and as attackers are embracing it in their tool belt. What to understand about Gen AI then in terms of modern networks and kind of where we are. Gen AI is a tool for everyone. This includes attackers. It's not just defenders. Gen AI increases attacker speed across the kill chain. It means every step of that attack can be faster and faster and faster. It doesn't mean it's a new attack. It just means it's a faster attack that they can execute. And what that means, because Gen AI, when it comes to living off the land and the things attackers are going to do, protecting Gen AI, protecting the modern kind of environments that it's deployed in, means protecting identities. Monitoring what our identities will do is the best way to protect any Gen AI deployment that's out there today. 3 key areas: numbers, attackers, Gen AI. That's the current kind of view that I'm seeing, but it's useful in any of these exercises when you take a look at what's going on today and what's going on in the past to look to the future. So I wanted to give you kind of 3 views that I have as I look to the future given the current trends that I'm seeing today. I think that if we look forward in time, data breaches are going to cost more and they're going to happen faster. Maybe a conservative estimate, but you look at that graph of cost of a breach going up, you look at the kind of timing of how fast attackers are moving from that report of down from an hour now in terms of moving laterally. Things Gen AI can do, it's just going to move faster, it's going to cost more. Most breaches will impact multiple domains, 40%, but you saw that 20% growth in cloud spend, you saw that 10% growth in network. Those areas aren't going away, they're just getting bigger and bigger. The value for an attacker is going to spread further and further across these domains, and those breaches will start to impact those places more and more. So we go from 40%, I think in the future it's going to be 50, 60, it's going to be in those higher numbers in the future. It won't just stay at those low numbers. Most attacks will be hybrid in the future. And the last thing here, kind of a little bit of doom and gloom on the left and right, is defenders can stop these things. And that is really from embracing things like AI. AI will be, and it is currently, in my opinion, and from what I see and all the research I've done, the most powerful tool to stop attackers. And so folks that kind of use Vectra or are looking at Vectra, these are the ways that you can feel confident in securing your environment to stop attackers in this modern landscape.